Question 1. Quality control measures reveal that the risk assessment process for a newly implemented FlexPod solution has been completed, but there are concerns about its thoroughness and alignment with organizational risk appetite. Which of the following approaches to addressing these concerns best reflects professional best practices and regulatory compliance? Option A. Accept the completed risk assessment as is, assuming the technical team has adequately addressed all potential issues during the implementation phase. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the risk assessment, involving technical experts, business stakeholders, and compliance personnel, to identify any gaps, validate findings, and ensure mitigation strategies are practical and aligned with organizational risk tolerance and relevant regulatory frameworks. Option C. Initiate a new, independent risk assessment by an external consultancy, without involving the original implementation team or internal stakeholders, to ensure complete objectivity. Option D. Focus solely on addressing any identified technical vulnerabilities in the FlexPod configuration, as this is the primary responsibility of the implementation team. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the risk assessment, involving technical experts, business stakeholders, and compliance personnel, to identify any gaps, validate findings, and ensure mitigation strategies are practical and aligned with organizational risk tolerance and relevant regulatory frameworks. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT infrastructure management, ensuring that risk assessments for a FlexPod solution are comprehensive and align with organizational policies and regulatory expectations. The professional challenge lies in balancing the technical implementation details of FlexPod with the broader organizational risk management framework. A thorough risk assessment is not merely a technical exercise, but a critical component of governance and compliance, directly impacting the security, availability, and integrity of the data and services hosted on the FlexPod. The correct approach, which involves a structured risk assessment methodology that considers both technical vulnerabilities and business impact, represents best professional practice. This aligns with general IT governance principles and, in the context of a regulated environment, assuming a U.S. jurisdiction for this exam, as is common for such certifications, would likely be supported by frameworks like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, guidelines, which emphasize a systematic approach to identifying, analyzing, and responding to risks. Such an approach ensures that resources are allocated effectively to mitigate the most significant threats, thereby protecting the organization's assets and meeting its compliance obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical configuration without considering business context or potential operational impacts is professionally unacceptable. This failure could lead to an incomplete understanding of the actual risks, potentially leaving critical business functions exposed. From a regulatory standpoint, this would represent a failure to implement adequate risk management controls, which could result in non-compliance with data protection laws, industry-specific regulations, or internal audit requirements. Another incorrect approach, which involves deferring risk assessment entirely to a separate team without active participation or review from the FlexPod implementation team, is also professionally unsound. While specialized risk assessment teams are valuable, the implementation team possesses intimate knowledge of the FlexPod's architecture, dependencies, and operational characteristics. Their input is crucial for an accurate and actionable risk assessment. Failing to involve them creates a disconnect, leading to potentially unrealistic or incomplete risk identification and mitigation strategies. This can be viewed as a dereliction of duty in ensuring the security and resilience of the deployed solution. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed of deployment over thorough risk assessment, even if technically sound, is ethically and professionally problematic. The imperative to deliver solutions quickly must be balanced with the responsibility to ensure they are secure and resilient. Cutting corners on risk assessment can have severe long-term consequences, including data breaches, service disruptions, and reputational damage, all of which can lead to significant financial and legal repercussions. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the organization's overall risk posture. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the organizational risk management framework and relevant regulatory requirements. 2. Collaborating with stakeholders, including business owners, security teams, and compliance officers, to define the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. 3. Employing a systematic risk assessment methodology that identifies assets, threats, vulnerabilities, likelihood, and impact. 4. Documenting the risk assessment process, findings, and proposed mitigation strategies. 5. Ensuring that mitigation plans are integrated into the implementation and ongoing administration of the FlexPod solution. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment as the environment changes. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that delaying a critical security patch for the FlexPod solution could save a significant amount of immediate labor costs associated with testing and deployment. However, the patch addresses known vulnerabilities that could be exploited to compromise data integrity and system availability. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the administrator? Option A. Follow the vendor's recommended patching schedule, which includes a thorough testing phase and a staging environment before production deployment to ensure system stability and security. Option B. Delay the deployment of the critical security patch indefinitely, citing the immediate cost savings as the primary justification. Option C. Implement the critical security patch immediately without any testing, prioritizing the reduction of immediate labor costs. Option D. Proceed with the immediate deployment of the critical security patch to all components of the FlexPod solution after a brief, internal review of the patch notes. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the immediate deployment of the critical security patch to all components of the FlexPod solution after a brief, internal review of the patch notes. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in IT administration, where a perceived immediate cost-saving conflicts with long-term security and compliance obligations. The challenge lies in balancing the pressure to reduce expenditure with the responsibility to maintain a secure and compliant FlexPod environment, as mandated by the exam's regulatory framework. The administrator must exercise sound professional judgment to avoid compromising data integrity or exposing the organization to undue risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes the integrity and security of the FlexPod solution by adhering to established patching and update schedules. This aligns with best practices for system administration and regulatory compliance, which typically require timely application of security patches to mitigate known vulnerabilities. By following the vendor's recommended schedule and performing thorough testing, the administrator ensures that the FlexPod environment remains secure, stable, and compliant with any relevant data protection or cybersecurity regulations that might be implicitly or explicitly referenced within the FPIMPADM exam scope. This proactive stance prevents potential security breaches, data loss, and the associated reputational and financial damage, ultimately representing the most responsible and professionally sound course of action. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the patch immediately without testing introduces significant risk. This approach disregards the potential for the patch to cause system instability or introduce new, unforeseen issues within the complex FlexPod architecture. Such a failure could lead to service disruptions, data corruption, and a violation of service-level agreements, potentially contravening regulatory requirements for system availability and data integrity. Delaying the patch indefinitely without a clear justification or risk assessment is also professionally unacceptable. This decision prioritizes short-term cost avoidance over long-term security. It leaves the FlexPod environment vulnerable to known exploits, increasing the likelihood of a security incident. Regulatory frameworks often mandate a risk-based approach to security, and ignoring known vulnerabilities without a documented rationale would be a clear failure to meet these obligations. Applying the patch only to non-critical components while leaving critical infrastructure unpatched creates a false sense of security. This selective patching strategy leaves the most sensitive parts of the FlexPod solution exposed, representing a significant security gap. It demonstrates a lack of comprehensive understanding of the interconnectedness of the FlexPod components, and a failure to apply security measures uniformly across the entire solution, which would likely be a violation of security best practices and potentially regulatory mandates. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, they must understand the specific vulnerabilities addressed by the patch and the potential impact of those vulnerabilities on the FlexPod environment. Second, they should consult the vendor's documentation and recommended deployment procedures, which often include testing phases. Third, they should assess the risks associated with both applying and delaying the patch, considering factors like the criticality of the affected systems, the exploitability of the vulnerabilities, and the organization's risk tolerance. Finally, they should communicate their findings and recommendations to stakeholders, ensuring that any decision is made with full awareness of the potential consequences and in alignment with organizational policies and regulatory requirements. Question 3. Benchmark analysis indicates that a FlexPod solution is being implemented within a regulated industry. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the relevant jurisdictional framework and upholds professional standards for IT administration? Option A. Implement only the most commonly recognized security controls for network and storage components of the FlexPod, without a detailed analysis of specific regulatory mandates. Option B. Solely adopt vendor-recommended configurations and best practices for the FlexPod solution, assuming they inherently meet all regulatory requirements. Option C. Prioritize cost reduction strategies for the FlexPod implementation, deferring any compliance-related enhancements that might increase initial expenditure. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the FlexPod implementation, evaluating its alignment with specific jurisdictional data protection, security, and operational regulations, and implement controls to address identified gaps. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the FlexPod implementation, evaluating its alignment with specific jurisdictional data protection, security, and operational regulations, and implement controls to address identified gaps. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Implementing and administering a FlexPod solution involves integrating hardware and software from multiple vendors, creating a complex ecosystem. Ensuring optimal performance, security, and compliance requires a thorough understanding of each component's capabilities and limitations, as well as their interactions. The challenge lies in balancing vendor-specific best practices with the overarching regulatory framework governing data handling and IT infrastructure within the specified jurisdiction. A failure to adhere to these regulations can lead to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a holistic, risk-based evaluation that aligns with the principles of due diligence and responsible IT governance. This involves systematically assessing the FlexPod solution against the relevant regulatory requirements, identifying potential gaps, and implementing appropriate controls. This aligns with the general principles of IT governance and risk management, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks that require organizations to protect data and ensure the integrity of their systems. By prioritizing a comprehensive review, the organization demonstrates a commitment to compliance and operational excellence, which are foundational to maintaining trust and avoiding regulatory scrutiny. Incorrect approaches analysis. Focusing solely on vendor-recommended configurations without independent validation represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. While vendor recommendations are valuable, they are not inherently compliant with all jurisdictional regulations. Relying exclusively on these can lead to overlooking specific data privacy, security, or operational requirements mandated by law. This approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and an abdication of responsibility for ensuring compliance. Prioritizing cost reduction over compliance and performance is another critical failure. Regulatory frameworks often impose minimum standards for data security and availability, which may incur costs. Ignoring these requirements in favor of short-term savings can lead to severe penalties and operational failures that far outweigh any initial cost benefits. Ethically, this approach prioritizes financial gain over the protection of sensitive data and the reliable operation of critical systems, which is unacceptable. Implementing only the most visible or easily demonstrable security controls without a comprehensive risk assessment is also problematic. This superficial approach fails to address underlying vulnerabilities and may not meet the substantive requirements of regulatory mandates. It creates a false sense of security and leaves the organization exposed to risks that could lead to regulatory noncompliance and data breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with implementing and administering FlexPod solutions must adopt a proactive and comprehensive approach to compliance. This involves 1. understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to their organization and data. 2. Conducting a thorough risk assessment of the FlexPod implementation, considering both technical and operational aspects. 3. Evaluating vendor best practices in the context of regulatory requirements, not as a substitute for them. 4. Developing and implementing a robust compliance strategy that includes appropriate controls, monitoring, and auditing. 5. Prioritizing compliance and security alongside performance and cost considerations, recognizing that these are interconnected. 6. Maintaining ongoing awareness of regulatory changes and updating the FlexPod administration strategy accordingly. Question 4. Benchmark analysis indicates that the storage subsystem performance of a newly implemented FlexPod solution is not meeting the expected throughput for a critical application. The project deadline is approaching rapidly, and the application team is expressing concern about potential performance degradation impacting user experience. As the administrator responsible for the FlexPod implementation, what is the most appropriate course of action to address this performance bottleneck? Option A. Apply a temporary workaround by disabling certain storage features that are not critical for the application's immediate functionality without consulting the vendor or change control. Option B. Engage the FlexPod vendor's technical support to analyze the benchmark results, request validated tuning recommendations, and plan for testing these recommendations in a staging environment before production deployment. Option C. Immediately implement a configuration change to the storage array based on a forum discussion to increase IOPS and monitor the production environment closely. Option D. Advise the application team to adjust their application's I/O patterns to be less demanding on the storage, as the FlexPod is performing within its documented specifications. Correct answer is C. Immediately implement a configuration change to the storage array based on a forum discussion to increase IOPS and monitor the production environment closely. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge where a critical component, the storage subsystem, is identified as a potential bottleneck during a performance benchmark. The challenge lies in balancing the need for immediate resolution to meet project timelines, with the requirement to adhere to established change management processes and ensure the integrity and stability of the FlexPod solution. Rushing a fix without proper validation could introduce new issues, impact other services, or violate internal policies and potentially regulatory compliance if the solution supports regulated workloads. The pressure to deliver quickly can lead to shortcuts that undermine best practices. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, documented process of investigation and remediation. This aligns with best professional practices for IT infrastructure management, emphasizing a controlled and auditable methodology. Specifically, it adheres to the principles of change management, risk assessment, and thorough testing. By engaging the vendor for validated solutions and performing comprehensive testing in a staging environment before production deployment, the administrator ensures that the proposed fix is effective, does not introduce regressions, and meets performance targets without compromising the stability or security of the FlexPod environment. This methodical approach minimizes risk and ensures compliance with internal IT governance frameworks, which are often implicitly or explicitly tied to regulatory requirements for data integrity and availability. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing a fix directly in the production environment without prior testing or vendor validation represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This bypasses critical change control procedures, increasing the risk of unplanned downtime, data corruption, or security vulnerabilities. Such an action could violate internal policies designed to ensure system stability and compliance with data protection regulations. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the potential impact on business operations and data integrity. Applying a workaround that has not been fully vetted or approved by the vendor or internal change control board is also professionally unacceptable. While seemingly a quick fix, unapproved workarounds can mask underlying issues, lead to unpredictable behavior, and complicate future troubleshooting or upgrades. This approach risks violating service-level agreements, SLAs, and could be seen as a failure to maintain the solution according to vendor specifications and internal standards, potentially impacting compliance with operational resilience requirements. Failing to document the issue and the proposed solution. Even if a fix is eventually implemented, is a failure in auditability and knowledge management. Proper documentation is crucial for regulatory compliance, incident response, and future system maintenance. Without it, it becomes difficult to demonstrate due diligence, trace the root cause of problems, or ensure that the system is being managed in accordance with established procedures. This lack of transparency can lead to compliance issues if an audit requires a clear record of system changes and performance tuning activities. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach implementation challenges by first understanding the scope and impact of the issue. This involves gathering data, consulting relevant documentation, including vendor best practices and internal policies, and performing initial diagnostics. The next step is to identify potential solutions, evaluating them against criteria such as effectiveness, risk, cost, and compliance. A critical part of this process is engaging with stakeholders, including vendors and internal change management teams, to ensure buy-in and adherence to established procedures. Thorough testing in a non-production environment is paramount before any changes are made to the live system. Documentation should be maintained throughout the entire process, from initial identification to final resolution and post-implementation review. This structured, risk-aware, and documented approach ensures that solutions are robust, compliant, and professionally implemented. Question 5. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of performance degradation in the FlexPod environment due to unoptimized data flow processes. To address this, which approach to process optimization best aligns with maintaining system integrity and compliance? Option A. Rely on automated, self-healing scripts that dynamically alter data processing logic without human oversight or prior validation. Option B. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving detailed analysis, controlled testing of proposed changes in a staging environment, and a documented rollback plan before deploying to production. Option C. Focus solely on increasing hardware resources to compensate for inefficient data flow without addressing the underlying process issues. Option D. Immediately deploy a series of uncoordinated, rapid adjustments to data handling scripts based on anecdotal evidence of bottlenecks. Correct answer is B. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, involving detailed analysis, controlled testing of proposed changes in a staging environment, and a documented rollback plan before deploying to production. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational efficiency with the long-term implications of data integrity and compliance within the FlexPod solution. The risk matrix highlights potential disruptions to the FlexPod environment, which could impact critical business functions and lead to regulatory scrutiny. Careful judgment is required to select an approach that mitigates these risks effectively without introducing new vulnerabilities or violating established protocols. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, documented, and controlled process for implementing changes. This aligns with the principles of good governance and risk management inherent in implementing and administering complex IT solutions like FlexPod. Specifically, it ensures that any modifications to the FlexPod environment are understood, tested, and approved, thereby minimizing the likelihood of unintended consequences and maintaining compliance with any relevant industry standards or internal policies that govern system changes and data handling. This proactive stance on process optimization, focusing on structured validation and rollback capabilities, is crucial for maintaining the stability and security of the FlexPod solution. An incorrect approach that bypasses formal change control procedures and relies solely on ad hoc adjustments would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach increases the risk of introducing errors, compromising data integrity, and creating security vulnerabilities, all of which could lead to non-compliance with data protection regulations or service-level agreements. Furthermore, it undermines accountability and auditability, making it difficult to trace the cause of any future issues. Another incorrect approach that focuses on rapid implementation without adequate testing or validation, even if it appears to address the immediate risk, fails to uphold the professional responsibility to ensure the reliability and security of the deployed solution. This can lead to unforeseen system instability or performance degradation, impacting business operations and potentially leading to breaches of contractual obligations or regulatory requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the identified risks and their potential impact. This involves assessing the severity and likelihood of each risk as presented in the risk matrix. Subsequently, potential solutions or optimization strategies should be evaluated against established best practices for IT service management and the specific requirements of the FlexPod solution. This evaluation should consider factors such as the impact on system stability, data integrity, security, and compliance. A critical step is to consult relevant documentation, vendor guidelines, and internal policies to ensure that any chosen approach is aligned with the approved operational framework. Finally, a risk-based approach to decision-making, prioritizing solutions that offer robust control, thorough validation, and clear rollback plans, is essential for maintaining professional integrity and ensuring the successful and compliant administration of the FlexPod solution. Question 6. Operational review demonstrates that a newly implemented FlexPod solution is technically functional and meets the immediate operational requirements of the requesting business unit. However, the mandated regulatory compliance validation process has not yet been fully completed, with several key security and data privacy checks pending. The business unit is eager for immediate deployment to realize anticipated business benefits, which approach best upholds regulatory compliance and professional responsibility. Option A. Deploy the FlexPod solution into production based on the business unit's assurance that it meets their needs, and defer all discussions regarding regulatory compliance to a later, undefined phase of the project. Option B. Proceed with the full deployment of the FlexPod solution into the production environment, with a commitment to complete the outstanding regulatory compliance validations as soon as possible post-deployment. Option C. Initiate the production deployment of the FlexPod solution, focusing solely on its technical functionality, and address any identified compliance gaps through subsequent ad hoc adjustments as they arise. Option D. Prioritize the completion of all mandated regulatory compliance validations and security checks, ensuring full adherence to the established framework, before authorizing the production deployment of the FlexPod solution. Correct answer is B. Proceed with the full deployment of the FlexPod solution into the production environment, with a commitment to complete the outstanding regulatory compliance validations as soon as possible post-deployment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new technology and the meticulous adherence to established governance and compliance frameworks. The pressure to deliver a functional FlexPod solution quickly, driven by business needs, can create a temptation to bypass or expedite critical review processes. This is particularly challenging when stakeholders, such as the business unit requesting the solution, may not fully appreciate the regulatory implications or the importance of thorough validation from a compliance perspective. The professional challenge lies in balancing the urgency of business requirements with the non-negotiable need for regulatory compliance and risk mitigation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the completion of all mandated regulatory compliance checks and validations before the FlexPod solution is deployed into the production environment. This aligns directly with the principles of responsible technology implementation and risk management, which are implicitly or explicitly embedded in regulatory frameworks governing IT systems. By ensuring that all security, data privacy, and operational integrity controls are verified against the relevant regulations, e.g., data protection laws, industry-specific compliance standards, the organization mitigates the risk of non-compliance, potential fines, data breaches, and reputational damage. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to ethical business practices and robust governance, safeguarding both the organization and its customers. Incorrect approach is analysis. Deploying the FlexPod solution with the intention of retroactively addressing compliance gaps is professionally unacceptable. This approach represents a significant regulatory failure because it knowingly bypasses established compliance procedures. It creates an unacceptable level of risk, as the system would be operating in a non-compliant state, potentially exposing sensitive data or violating operational mandates from the outset. This directly contravenes the principle of compliance by design and demonstrates a disregard for the regulatory framework. Proceeding with deployment based solely on the business unit's assurance that the solution meets their needs without independent regulatory validation is also professionally unsound. This ignores the distinct roles and responsibilities within an organization regarding compliance. Business needs are important, but they do not supersede regulatory requirements. Relying solely on the business unit's assessment, which may lack the specialized knowledge of regulatory intricacies, is an abdication of responsibility and a failure to uphold due diligence. Focusing solely on the technical functionality of the FlexPod solution and deferring all compliance-related discussions to a later, undefined phase is a critical error. Technical functionality is a prerequisite, but it is not sufficient for a compliant deployment. Regulatory compliance is an integral part of the solution's overall readiness and acceptability. Delaying these discussions indefinitely or treating them as an afterthought significantly increases the likelihood of noncompliance and the associated risks. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with implementing and administering solutions like FlexPod must adopt a risk-based and compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the full scope of applicable regulatory requirements relevant to the solution and its intended use. 2. Integrating compliance checks and validations as mandatory milestones within the project lifecycle, not as optional add-ons. 3. Engaging relevant compliance and legal teams early and continuously throughout the implementation process. 4. Prioritizing the completion of all compliance requirements before any production deployment. 5. Documenting all compliance activities and validations to demonstrate adherence to regulatory mandates. 6. Escalating any potential conflicts between business needs and compliance requirements to appropriate governance bodies for resolution. Question 7. The control framework reveals that the implementation of the FlexPod solution must adhere to specific data protection and privacy regulations relevant to the organization's operating jurisdiction. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance throughout the FlexPod lifecycle? Option A. Prioritizing the rapid deployment of the FlexPod solution to meet business needs, with a plan to remediate any identified compliance gaps in a subsequent phase. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive review of all applicable data protection and privacy regulations, mapping these requirements to FlexPod features, and integrating compliance controls into the design, deployment, and ongoing administration phases. Option C. Implementing the FlexPod solution with a focus on performance and scalability, and addressing regulatory requirements only if audit findings indicate a deficiency. Option D. Relying on the default security and compliance settings provided by the FlexPod solutions vendors, assuming they meet all jurisdictional requirements. Correct answer is C. Implementing the FlexPod solution with a focus on performance and scalability, and addressing regulatory requirements only if audit findings indicate a deficiency. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge in implementing and administering complex IT solutions like FlexPod, ensuring that the deployed infrastructure adheres to established regulatory compliance requirements without hindering operational efficiency. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need for robust security and data integrity, mandated by regulations, with the practicalities of system deployment and ongoing management. This requires a deep understanding of both the technical capabilities of the FlexPod solution and the specific regulatory landscape it operates within. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it proactively integrates regulatory compliance into the design and implementation phases. This ensures that the FlexPod solution is not only technically sound, but also meets all legal and industry-specific mandates from the outset. By aligning the implementation with the identified regulatory requirements, the organization minimizes the risk of noncompliance, which can lead to significant financial penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruptions. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible IT governance. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of deployment over thorough compliance checks would represent a significant regulatory failure. This could lead to the introduction of vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that violate data privacy laws, e.g., GDPR if applicable to the jurisdiction, or similar data protection regulations, industry-specific standards, e.g., PCI DSS for payment card data, HIPAA for healthcare data, or general IT security, best practices mandated by regulatory bodies. Such an oversight could result in data breaches, unauthorized access, or improper data handling, all of which carry severe legal and financial repercussions. Another incorrect approach, focusing solely on the technical aspects of FlexPod without considering the underlying data it will process and store, is also professionally unacceptable. Its failure to consider the data's classification and the associated regulatory obligations means that the implemented controls might be insufficient to protect sensitive information. For instance, if the FlexPod solution is intended to store financial or personal data, and the implementation lacks appropriate encryption, access controls, or audit logging mechanisms, as required by relevant financial or privacy regulations, it constitutes a direct violation. A third incorrect approach, assuming that the vendor's default configurations inherently meet all regulatory requirements, is a dangerous assumption. While vendors often strive for compliance, their default settings are typically designed for broad applicability and may not address the specific, nuanced requirements of a particular organization's operating jurisdiction or industry. Relying on these defaults without verification and customization would be a failure to perform due diligence and could lead to noncompliance with specific local or industry regulations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment that explicitly includes regulatory compliance as a key factor. This means identifying all applicable regulations early in the project lifecycle, mapping these requirements to the FlexPod solution's capabilities, and incorporating compliance checks into every stage of implementation and administration. Regular audits and reviews, both internal and external, are crucial to ensure ongoing adherence. Professionals must adopt a proactive, risk-aware mindset, prioritizing compliance as a foundational element of any IT solution deployment. Question 8. Comparative studies suggest that the most effective approach to administering a FlexPod solution for optimal performance involves a deep understanding of interdependencies. When evaluating different performance tuning strategies, which methodology best aligns with professional best practices for a FlexPod environment? Option A. Adopting a reactive performance management strategy, only addressing performance issues when they are reported by end users or trigger critical alerts. Option B. Focusing exclusively on optimizing the storage subsystem's IOPS and latency, as this is often the most critical factor for application performance. Option C. Prioritizing performance tuning efforts based on the specific recommendations provided by each individual hardware and software vendor, without extensive cross-component validation. Option D. Implementing a holistic, integrated performance tuning methodology that considers the interactions and dependencies between compute, network, and storage components, validated through comprehensive testing. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing performance tuning efforts based on the specific recommendations provided by each individual hardware and software vendor, without extensive cross-component validation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. Implementing and administering a FlexPod solution involves integrating hardware and software from multiple vendors, creating a complex ecosystem. This complexity presents a professional challenge when evaluating best practices for performance optimization and resource allocation. Administrators must balance vendor-specific recommendations with overall system efficiency and cost-effectiveness, ensuring compliance with internal policies and potentially external service-level agreements, SLAs. The challenge lies in discerning which optimization strategies are truly beneficial for the integrated solution versus those that might be vendor-centric or introduce unintended consequences. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a holistic, integrated performance tuning methodology. This aligns with best professional practice by acknowledging that a FlexPod is more than the sum of its parts. It requires understanding how components interact and how changes in one area can impact others. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes the overall health and efficiency of the entire solution, leading to predictable performance, reduced downtime, and optimized resource utilization. From a regulatory and ethical standpoint, this approach ensures that the implemented solution meets agreed-upon service levels and avoids over-provisioning or under-provisioning of resources, which could have financial or operational implications for the organization. It demonstrates due diligence in managing a critical IT infrastructure. Incorrect approach is analysis. Focusing solely on optimizing individual components without considering their interaction is a common pitfall. This approach fails to recognize the integrated nature of FlexPod. For example, aggressively tuning a storage array for maximum IOPS might negatively impact network latency or compute performance, leading to a net decrease in overall application responsiveness. This is professionally unacceptable, as it can lead to suboptimal performance and wasted resources. Ethically, it could be seen as a failure to deliver the promised performance of the integrated solution. Another incorrect approach is to blindly follow vendor-specific tuning guides without validating their impact on the FlexPod as a whole. While vendor guides are valuable, they are often written with their specific products in mind and may not account for the unique integration within a FlexPod. This can lead to conflicts between vendor recommendations or introduce inefficiencies. Professionally, this demonstrates a lack of critical evaluation and can result in misconfigurations. It could also be considered a failure to exercise professional judgment in managing the integrated solution. Adopting a set-it-and-forget-it mentality, where no proactive performance monitoring or tuning is performed, is also professionally deficient. IT environments are dynamic, and performance characteristics can change over time due to workload shifts, software updates, or hardware aging. Neglecting performance management can lead to gradual degradation, impacting user experience and business operations. This passive approach fails to uphold the professional responsibility of ensuring the ongoing optimal functioning of the implemented solution. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with administering FlexPod solutions should adopt a systematic, evidence-based approach to performance evaluation and tuning. This involves 1. Understanding the integrated architecture. Gain a comprehensive understanding of how all components, compute, network, storage, interact within the FlexPod. 2. Establishing baseline performance metrics. Define clear, measurable performance indicators for the solution and its critical applications. 3. Implementing a phased tuning process. Make changes incrementally and monitor their impact rigorously. 4. Leveraging integrated monitoring tools. Utilize tools that provide visibility across the entire FlexPod stack. 5. Consulting vendor best practices but validating their applicability. Use vendor recommendations as a starting point, but always test and verify their impact in the specific FlexPod environment. 6. Regularly reviewing and adapting. Performance tuning is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. This decision-making process ensures that optimizations are effective, do not introduce new problems, and ultimately contribute to the reliable and efficient operation of the FlexPod solution, meeting both business needs and professional standards. Question 9. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in latency for critical applications hosted on the FlexPod solution, impacting user experience and productivity. Several departments have expressed concerns about the degradation, but a quick resolution is being prioritized over a comprehensive analysis. Which approach best addresses this situation while adhering to the principles of responsible FlexPod administration? Option A. Initiate a deep dive analysis of the FlexPod infrastructure, engaging with application owners and infrastructure teams to identify the root cause of the latency, and propose a solution that addresses both immediate performance issues and long-term stability, ensuring compliance with all relevant performance and availability guidelines. Option B. Defer any significant infrastructure changes until the next scheduled maintenance window, and provide users with temporary workarounds to mitigate the perceived performance issues. Option C. Implement a series of rapid, unvalidated configuration changes across the storage and network components of the FlexPod to attempt to reduce latency, based on anecdotal evidence from recent troubleshooting efforts. Option D. Focus on optimizing the application code itself to reduce its resource demands, without investigating the underlying FlexPod infrastructure's contribution to the latency. The correct answer is A. Initiate a deep dive analysis of the FlexPod infrastructure, engaging with application owners and infrastructure teams to identify the root cause of the latency, and propose a solution that addresses both immediate performance issues and long-term stability, ensuring compliance with all relevant performance and availability guidelines. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate operational needs of the business with the long-term strategic implications of technology choices, all while adhering to the specific regulatory framework governing the implementation and administration of FlexPod solutions. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting performance data and translating it into actionable decisions that align with stakeholder expectations and compliance requirements. Careful judgment is needed to avoid short-sighted solutions that could lead to future compliance issues or operational inefficiencies. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a thorough, data-driven analysis that considers the broader impact on all stakeholders. By engaging with key stakeholders, understanding their specific needs and constraints, and evaluating potential solutions against established performance benchmarks and regulatory guidelines, the administrator ensures that the chosen path is not only technically sound, but also strategically aligned and compliant. This proactive and collaborative method minimizes risk and maximizes the value derived from the FlexPod investment, adhering to the spirit and letter of the regulatory framework for FlexPod implementation. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate cost reduction without a comprehensive impact assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely violate regulatory principles by potentially compromising service levels or data integrity, which are often implicitly or explicitly covered by performance and availability mandates within the FlexPod framework. Furthermore, it demonstrates a failure to consider the long-term operational and financial implications, potentially leading to increased costs down the line due to rework or performance degradation. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing a quick fix without proper testing or validation would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could lead to system instability, data corruption, or security vulnerabilities, all of which are critical concerns within the FlexPod administration context and are likely addressed by performance and security standards. Such an action disregards the due diligence required for implementing and administering complex IT solutions, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks and noncompliance. A third incorrect approach that ignores the feedback from critical business units and proceeds with a solution that does not meet their operational requirements would also be professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of stakeholder management and a failure to understand the business context of the FlexPod solution. It could lead to operational disruptions, decreased productivity, and ultimately, a failure to achieve the intended business outcomes, which is contrary to the purpose of implementing such a solution and the underlying regulatory expectations for effective IT administration. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly define the problem and gather all relevant performance data. Second, identify and engage all key stakeholders to understand their perspectives, requirements, and constraints. Third, evaluate potential solutions against a defined set of criteria, including performance, cost, scalability, security, and regulatory compliance. Fourth, conduct a thorough risk assessment for each viable option. Fifth, document the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen solution. Finally, implement the chosen solution with appropriate testing, validation, and ongoing monitoring. Question 10. To address the challenge of a critical business unit requesting an immediate, unbudgeted software upgrade for a core application running on the FlexPod solution, which requires significant configuration changes to the underlying infrastructure, what is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Inform the business unit that the request cannot be fulfilled due to the lack of prior planning and budget, without exploring any alternative solutions or mitigation strategies. Option B. Immediately implement the upgrade to meet the business unit's urgent request, assuming the risk of potential disruption is acceptable for business continuity. Option C. Delegate the decision-making authority to the junior administrator responsible for the FlexPod environment to expedite the process. Option D. Initiate a formal change request process that includes a thorough impact assessment, risk analysis, and stakeholder review before proceeding with any implementation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal change request process that includes a thorough impact assessment, risk analysis, and stakeholder review before proceeding with any implementation. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge in IT administration, balancing the immediate need for a new feature with the established processes for change management and risk assessment. The FlexPod solution, being a complex integrated infrastructure, amplifies this challenge. A hasty implementation without proper vetting can lead to unforeseen compatibility issues, security vulnerabilities, or performance degradation, all of which have direct implications for business operations and data integrity. The professional challenge lies in navigating the pressure for rapid deployment, while upholding the principles of robust system administration and adherence to established governance. The correct approach prioritizes a structured, risk-aware decision-making process. This aligns with best professional practices by ensuring that any change to the FlexPod environment is thoroughly evaluated for its impact on stability, security, and performance. It involves engaging relevant stakeholders, conducting impact assessments, and obtaining necessary approvals before implementation. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of introducing critical failures, ensures compliance with internal policies and potentially external regulations. Though none are specified for this exam, the principle of due diligence is universal and ultimately safeguards the integrity and availability of the FlexPod solution. An incorrect approach that bypasses established change control procedures and risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This failure represents a direct contravention of sound IT governance principles. Specifically, it demonstrates a disregard for due diligence, potentially exposing the organization to significant operational risks, data breaches, or service disruptions. Such an approach could be seen as negligent, as it prioritizes expediency over responsible system management. Furthermore, if the organization has internal policies or compliance requirements related to change management, bypassing them would constitute a breach of those directives. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear framework. 1. Understand the request. Fully grasp the business need and technical requirements of the proposed change. 2. Assess impact. Evaluate the potential impact on existing systems, security, performance, and business operations. 3. Identify risks. Determine the potential risks associated with the change and the likelihood and severity of their occurrence. 4. Consult stakeholders. Engage with all relevant parties, including IT operations, security, business units, and management. 5. Evaluate alternatives. Consider different implementation strategies or alternative solutions. 6. Document and approve. Formally document the proposed change, risk assessment, and mitigation plans, and obtain necessary approvals through the established change control process. 7. Plan implementation. Develop a detailed implementation plan, including rollback procedures. 8. Execute and monitor. Implement the change according to the plan and closely monitor the system for any adverse effects. This framework ensures that decisions are informed, risks are managed, and changes are implemented in a controlled and responsible manner, upholding professional standards of care and accountability. Question 11. The control framework reveals that the operational team responsible for managing critical business applications hosted on the FlexPod solution requires immediate access to a specific storage array component to troubleshoot a performance degradation issue that is impacting end users. However, the security team's established change management policy mandates a minimum 24-hour review and approval period for all access modifications to production environments, including temporary elevated privileges. The operational team is concerned that waiting the full 24 hours will exacerbate the end-user impact. What is the most appropriate course of action for the operational team to take in this situation? Option A. Formally submit a change request detailing the urgency and impact, requesting expedited review and approval from the security team, and providing all necessary technical justifications for the access. Option B. Directly contact a senior executive in the IT department to bypass the security team's change control process and obtain immediate access approval. Option C. Temporarily disable the security team's change control policy for the specific storage array component until the performance issue is resolved. Option D. Proceed with accessing the storage array component using existing administrative credentials, assuming the risk of a security incident, to resolve the immediate operational issue. Correct answer is A. Formally submit a change request detailing the urgency and impact, requesting expedited review and approval from the security team, and providing all necessary technical justifications for the access. Explanation. The control framework reveals a critical juncture in the implementation of a FlexPod solution, where the operational team's immediate need for system access conflicts with the security team's mandated change control procedures. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the urgency of business operations against the necessity of robust security and compliance. The security team's adherence to established protocols, while potentially causing short-term delays, is paramount for maintaining the integrity and security posture of the FlexPod environment. The operational team's desire for rapid access, though understandable from a business continuity perspective, risks bypassing essential security validations, thereby introducing vulnerabilities. The correct approach, which involves the operational team formally submitting a change request through the established process, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of IT governance and compliance, ensuring that all modifications to the production environment are documented, reviewed, and approved by the appropriate stakeholders. This process is often mandated by regulatory frameworks that require auditable trails for system changes, particularly in environments handling sensitive data. Adhering to this process demonstrates a commitment to security best practices and regulatory compliance, preventing unauthorized access and potential security breaches. An incorrect approach would be for the operational team to bypass the change control process and grant themselves or their team members direct access to the FlexPod system without formal approval. This failure directly contravenes the principles of least privilege and segregation of duties, which are fundamental to secure IT operations. Such an action would represent a significant regulatory failure, as it bypasses documented controls designed to prevent unauthorized modifications and potential data compromise. Furthermore, it creates an ethical lapse by undermining the established security policies and the authority of the security team. Another incorrect approach would be for the security team to grant immediate ad hoc access without any form of documentation or review, even if verbally requested by a senior manager. While seemingly expedient, this also bypasses the control framework. This action would be a failure to uphold their professional responsibility to maintain security standards and would create an unmanageable security risk. It would also be a violation of audit requirements, as there would be no record of who granted access, to whom, and for what duration, making it impossible to trace any subsequent security incidents. The professional reasoning process for navigating such situations involves a clear understanding of the organization's established IT governance policies, security standards, and relevant regulatory requirements. When faced with conflicting priorities, professionals should 1. Identify the core conflict, operational urgency versus security/compliance. 2. Consult documented policies and procedures, understand the mandated change control process and security protocols. 3. Communicate and collaborate. Engage with the relevant teams, operations, and security to explain the rationale behind the procedures and explore potential expedited but compliant pathways. 4. Escalate if necessary. If a resolution cannot be reached through standard channels, escalate to management or a governance committee for a decision that balances operational needs with risk management. The ultimate goal is to ensure that business operations are supported without compromising the security and compliance of the FlexPod solution. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that the recent implementation of the FlexPod solution, while meeting performance objectives, may not have fully integrated all necessary data governance and privacy controls as mandated by relevant industry regulations. What is the most appropriate next step for the project team and IT leadership? Option A. Implement the FlexPod solution with minimal additional documentation, relying on the implementation team's verbal confirmation that all regulatory requirements have been met. Option B. Halt all further deployment and operations of the FlexPod solution until a complete audit of all IT infrastructure can be performed to ensure comprehensive compliance. Option C. Proceed with the FlexPod solution as planned, assuming the technical team's assessment of security and performance implicitly covers all regulatory aspects. Option D. Immediately engage legal counsel and the compliance department to conduct a targeted review of the FlexPod implementation against specific regulatory requirements and internal policies, and develop a remediation plan if gaps are identified. The correct answer is D. Immediately engage legal counsel and the compliance department to conduct a targeted review of the FlexPod implementation against specific regulatory requirements and internal policies, and develop a remediation plan if gaps are identified. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from the inherent tension between rapid technological deployment and the need for robust, compliant governance. The governance review highlights a potential gap where the implementation of a FlexPod solution, while technically sound, may not have adequately addressed all regulatory and stakeholder concerns. The challenge lies in balancing the benefits of the new infrastructure with the imperative to maintain compliance and stakeholder trust, especially when dealing with sensitive data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes proactive engagement with all relevant stakeholders, including legal and compliance teams, to ensure the FlexPod implementation aligns with all applicable regulations and internal policies. This aligns with the principles of good governance, which mandate transparency, accountability, and adherence to legal frameworks. By involving these groups early, potential compliance issues can be identified and mitigated before they escalate, safeguarding the organization from regulatory penalties and reputational damage. This approach demonstrates a commitment to responsible technology adoption, a key tenet in regulated environments. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves proceeding with the FlexPod solution without further consultation, assuming the technical team's assessment is sufficient. This fails to acknowledge the specialized expertise required in legal and compliance domains. It represents a significant regulatory failure by potentially overlooking data privacy regulations, industry-specific compliance mandates, or internal security policies. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the organization's broader responsibilities. Another incorrect approach is to halt the FlexPod implementation indefinitely pending a comprehensive, organization-wide review of all IT infrastructure. While thoroughness is important, this approach is overly cautious and can stifle innovation and operational efficiency. It fails to recognize that a targeted review of the specific implementation, focusing on the identified governance concerns, is a more proportionate and effective response. This can lead to missed business opportunities and a perception of organizational inertia, which is professionally detrimental. A third incorrect approach is to implement the FlexPod solution with minimal documentation and rely on informal assurances from the implementation team regarding compliance. This is a critical regulatory and ethical failure. It creates an environment of opacity, making it impossible to audit or verify compliance effectively. It also undermines accountability, as there is no clear record of decisions or risk assessments. This approach is unprofessional, as it prioritizes expediency over diligence and leaves the organization vulnerable to future scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, thoroughly understand the findings of the governance review and the specific concerns raised. Second, identify all relevant stakeholders, including technical, legal, compliance, and business units. Third, initiate a collaborative dialogue to assess the risks and requirements associated with the FlexPod implementation in relation to these concerns. Fourth, develop a remediation plan that addresses the identified gaps, prioritizing actions based on risk and regulatory impact. Finally, ensure all decisions and actions are documented for transparency and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that technological advancements are pursued responsibly and in full compliance with all governing frameworks. Question 13. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the proposed FlexPod solution implementation may introduce new vulnerabilities related to data privacy and security, potentially impacting compliance with the exam's specified regulatory framework. Which of the following approaches best addresses these identified risks while ensuring adherence to professional and regulatory standards? Option A. Implement the FlexPod solution with a focus on rapid deployment and address any compliance concerns post-implementation through reactive measures. Option B. Develop a detailed implementation plan that includes a comprehensive risk assessment, robust security controls, and a phased rollout with continuous compliance validation, involving relevant stakeholders throughout the process. Option C. Prioritize the technical performance and scalability of the FlexPod solution, deferring detailed compliance reviews until after the system is fully operational. Option D. Rely on the vendor's default security configurations for the FlexPod solution and assume they meet all regulatory requirements without independent verification. The correct answer is A. Implement the FlexPod solution with a focus on rapid deployment and address any compliance concerns post-implementation through reactive measures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent complexity of implementing and administering a FlexPod solution within a regulated environment. The core difficulty lies in balancing the technical requirements of the solution with the stringent compliance obligations mandated by the exam's jurisdiction. Specifically, the need to ensure data integrity, security, and availability while adhering to specific regulatory frameworks requires meticulous planning and execution. The pressure to deliver a functional and compliant solution within project timelines adds another layer of complexity, demanding careful judgment and a systematic approach to decision-making. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a thorough understanding of the FlexPod solution's architecture and its interaction with the existing IT infrastructure. It prioritizes a phased implementation strategy, starting with a comprehensive risk assessment and the development of detailed design documentation that explicitly addresses compliance requirements. This approach aligns with best professional practices by ensuring that all regulatory mandates are considered from the outset, rather than being an afterthought. It promotes a proactive stance on compliance, minimizing the likelihood of costly remediation or breaches. By involving relevant stakeholders, including compliance officers and security teams, throughout the process, it fosters a shared responsibility for adherence to regulations and ethical standards. This systematic and documented approach is crucial for demonstrating due diligence and accountability, which are fundamental in regulated industries. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that focuses solely on the technical aspects of FlexPod implementation without adequately considering regulatory implications represents a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This oversight can lead to non-compliance, data breaches, and potential legal repercussions. It demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility by neglecting critical aspects of system deployment that directly impact data protection and privacy. Another incorrect approach involves prioritizing speed of deployment over thorough testing and validation of compliance controls. This haste can result in vulnerabilities being overlooked, potentially exposing sensitive data to unauthorized access or modification. Such an approach violates the ethical obligation to implement secure and reliable systems and can lead to regulatory penalties for failing to meet security standards. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established change management and documentation procedures, even if seemingly efficient in the short term, is professionally unsound. This can lead to an unmanageable and undocumented environment, making it difficult to audit, troubleshoot, or ensure ongoing compliance. It undermines the principles of transparency and accountability, which are cornerstones of professional conduct in regulated sectors. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with implementing and administering solutions like FlexPod must adopt a decision-making framework that integrates technical expertise with a deep understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape. This framework should begin with a comprehensive understanding of the project's objectives, followed by a thorough risk assessment that identifies potential compliance gaps. The next step involves developing a detailed implementation plan that incorporates specific controls and procedures to mitigate identified risks and ensure adherence to all relevant regulations. Continuous monitoring, regular audits, and robust documentation are essential throughout the lifecycle of the solution. Collaboration with compliance and legal teams is paramount to ensure that all decisions and actions are aligned with regulatory requirements and ethical standards. This structured and risk-aware approach ensures that technical solutions are not only functional, but also secure, compliant, and ethically sound. Question 14. Consider a scenario where the marketing department urgently requests the implementation of a new FlexPod solution to support an upcoming, high-profile campaign. They emphasize the need for rapid deployment to capitalize on market opportunities, but have provided limited technical details about their specific application requirements beyond general performance expectations. The IT infrastructure team is concerned about potential integration challenges with existing systems and the security implications of a hastily deployed solution. What is the most professional approach to managing this request? Option A. Immediately begin configuring the FlexPod solution to meet the perceived performance needs, prioritizing speed over a comprehensive review of security and integration requirements. Option B. Proceed with a rapid deployment of the FlexPod solution based on the marketing department's general performance expectations, assuming that the existing infrastructure can accommodate the new application with minimal adjustments. Option C. Inform the marketing department that their request cannot be fulfilled due to the lack of detailed technical specifications, and advise them to resubmit their request once they have gathered all necessary information. Option D. Initiate a detailed discovery and assessment phase involving the marketing department, IT operations, security, and compliance teams to thoroughly understand the application requirements, assess integration points, identify potential risks, and develop a phased implementation plan that includes robust testing and validation. The correct answer is D. Initiate a detailed discovery and assessment phase involving the marketing department, IT operations, security, and compliance teams to thoroughly understand the application requirements, assess integration points, identify potential risks, and develop a phased implementation plan that includes robust testing and validation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new technology and the need for thorough risk assessment and stakeholder communication. The FPIMPADM exam syllabus emphasizes the importance of a structured approach to implementing and administering FlexPod solutions, which includes understanding and managing the impact on various business units. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of the marketing department's request with the potential for unforeseen operational disruption and compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the solution meets business needs without compromising stability, security, or regulatory adherence. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a comprehensive understanding of the FlexPod solution's capabilities and limitations within the context of the organization's existing infrastructure and regulatory environment. By engaging all relevant stakeholders, including IT operations, security, and compliance teams, the project team can proactively identify potential risks, define clear success criteria, and ensure that the implementation aligns with established governance frameworks. This collaborative process, guided by the principles outlined in the FPIMPADM syllabus, fosters transparency, mitigates risks, and ultimately leads to a more robust and sustainable solution. Adherence to the regulatory framework for data handling and system integrity, as implicitly covered by the exam scope, is paramount. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the marketing department's immediate needs without adequate technical validation or risk assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely lead to a rushed implementation that could introduce security vulnerabilities, performance bottlenecks, or data integrity issues, potentially violating internal policies and external regulations related to data protection and system availability. Another incorrect approach, which involves deploying the solution without clear communication or training for IT operations, would create a significant operational burden and increase the likelihood of misconfiguration or improper management, leading to system instability and potential breaches of service-level agreements. A third incorrect approach, bypassing the compliance team's review, risks non-adherence to data privacy laws and industry-specific regulations, exposing the organization to legal penalties and reputational damage. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a phased approach. First, thoroughly understanding the business requirement and its implications. Second, conducting a detailed technical assessment of the proposed solution's fit and potential impact. Third, engaging all relevant stakeholders in a risk assessment and mitigation planning process. Fourth, developing a comprehensive implementation and testing plan. And finally, ensuring ongoing monitoring and administration post-deployment. This structured methodology, aligned with the best practices taught in the FPIMPADM curriculum, ensures that technology solutions are implemented effectively, securely, and in compliance with all applicable requirements. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates that following a critical data migration to a new FlexPod solution, the implementation team proceeded with go-live based on the successful execution of the migration scripts alone, without performing any post-migration data integrity validation. Which of the following actions, if taken by the implementation team, would represent the most professionally sound approach to ensure data integrity and compliance? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive data integrity validation process, including automated checks and manual sampling against source data, to confirm accuracy and completeness before declaring the migration complete. Option B. Proceed with the go-live and schedule a thorough data integrity audit for the next quarterly review cycle. Option C. Assume that any minor data inconsistencies observed during initial system startup are acceptable and can be addressed through application-level adjustments over time. Option D. Rely on the application's built-in error handling mechanisms to identify and correct any data discrepancies that arise during initial system operation. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive data integrity validation process, including automated checks and manual sampling against source data, to confirm accuracy and completeness before declaring the migration complete. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge centered on data integrity and compliance within a FlexPod solution implementation. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need for operational functionality with the long-term implications of data corruption and the potential for regulatory noncompliance. The pressure to deliver a functional system quickly can lead to shortcuts that compromise data quality, which in turn can have significant financial and legal repercussions. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the implementation adheres to established data management best practices and any applicable regulatory frameworks, even under time constraints. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic validation of data integrity post-migration, employing automated tools and manual spot checks against source data. This represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the risk of data corruption during the migration process. By verifying data accuracy and completeness, the implementation team ensures that the FlexPod solution is not only operational but also reliable and trustworthy. This proactive approach aligns with principles of data governance and risk management, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory frameworks governing data handling and system integrity. It demonstrates a commitment to delivering a solution that meets functional requirements without compromising the quality and security of the data it manages. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the successful completion of the migration script without further validation. This is professionally unacceptable because migration scripts, while designed to be robust, can encounter unforeseen errors or data transformation issues that are not immediately apparent. This failure to validate data integrity creates a significant risk of operating with inaccurate or incomplete data, which could lead to flawed business decisions, operational errors, and potential breaches of data protection regulations if sensitive information is compromised. Another incorrect approach is to defer all data integrity checks to a later, unspecified phase. This is professionally unsound as it postpones critical risk mitigation. Regulatory frameworks often mandate that data accuracy and completeness be maintained throughout its lifecycle, including during system transitions. Delaying these checks increases the likelihood that corrupted data will be integrated into the production environment, making remediation more complex and costly. It also exposes the organization to potential noncompliance penalties for failing to ensure data quality from the outset. A third incorrect approach is to assume that any minor discrepancies identified during initial system startup are inconsequential and can be addressed through application-level error handling. This is a dangerous assumption. While application-level handling can manage some errors, it does not rectify the underlying data corruption. If the core data is flawed, the application's ability to function correctly and provide accurate outputs is compromised. This can lead to systemic issues that are difficult to trace back to the migration and can violate regulatory requirements for accurate record-keeping and reporting. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to data migration. This involves identifying potential data integrity risks, assessing their impact, and implementing appropriate controls. The decision-making process should prioritize verification and validation steps that confirm data accuracy and completeness. When faced with time pressures, professionals must advocate for sufficient time for these critical checks, explaining the potential consequences of skipping them in terms of operational risk and regulatory compliance. A robust data governance framework, which includes clear policies on data quality and migration validation, should guide these decisions. Question 16. Upon reviewing the security advisories for a critical component of the FlexPod solution, a potential vulnerability is identified that could impact data integrity. The current version of the component is nearing its end-of-support date, and an upgrade to a patched version is available but requires a planned downtime window that is difficult to schedule due to ongoing business operations. The administrator is considering several approaches to address this situation. Which approach best aligns with professional best practices for implementing and administering the FlexPod solution? Option A. Continue operating with the current version, documenting the risk and planning for the upgrade only after the component reaches its official end-of-support date. Option B. Inform management of the vulnerability and await explicit instructions on how to proceed, deferring any action until a directive is received. Option C. Implement a temporary workaround to mitigate the immediate risk of the vulnerability, while initiating a formal change request for the upgrade, including a comprehensive risk assessment and stakeholder communication plan. Option D. Immediately schedule and perform the upgrade during the next available low-usage period, prioritizing system security and data integrity over minor operational disruptions. The correct answer is D. Immediately schedule and perform the upgrade during the next available low-usage period, prioritizing system security and data integrity over minor operational disruptions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge in balancing the immediate need for system availability with the long-term integrity and security of the FlexPod solution. The administrator must make a judgment call that impacts operational continuity, data protection, and compliance. The core of the challenge lies in assessing the risk associated with a potential security vulnerability against the business impact of a system outage. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured, risk-based methodology aligned with established IT governance principles. By performing a thorough impact assessment and engaging relevant stakeholders, the administrator ensures that the decision to proceed with the upgrade is informed and justifiable. This proactive engagement with security and compliance teams, as well as business units, is crucial for maintaining a robust security posture and adhering to any relevant data protection regulations or internal policies that mandate risk mitigation before implementing changes that could affect sensitive data or system availability. This aligns with the principles of responsible system administration and change management, which are implicitly expected in any professional IT environment. An incorrect approach that bypasses proper change control and risk assessment processes represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Such an approach could lead to the introduction of new vulnerabilities or the exacerbation of existing ones, potentially violating data privacy regulations, e.g., if sensitive data is compromised, or internal security policies. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for established best practices in system administration and cybersecurity. Another incorrect approach, which involves delaying the upgrade indefinitely without a clear plan or risk mitigation strategy, also poses professional challenges. While seemingly cautious, it can lead to the system remaining vulnerable to known exploits, which itself is a risk. This inaction can be interpreted as negligence if a breach occurs due to the unaddressed vulnerability. Ethically, it fails to uphold the duty of care to protect the organization's assets and data. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on the technical aspects of the upgrade without considering the broader business implications or compliance requirements, is also professionally unacceptable. This narrow focus can lead to decisions that, while technically sound, have detrimental effects on business operations or create compliance gaps. It highlights a failure to understand the interconnectedness of IT systems with business objectives and regulatory obligations. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the identified issue, including its potential impact on system functionality, data integrity, and security. This should be followed by a risk assessment to quantify the likelihood and severity of potential negative outcomes. Consultation with relevant stakeholders, including security, compliance, and business unit representatives, is essential to gather diverse perspectives and ensure alignment with organizational objectives and regulatory requirements. Finally, a documented decision, based on the gathered information and risk assessment, should be made and implemented with appropriate change management controls. Question 17. The risk matrix shows a high likelihood and high impact for potential unauthorized access to sensitive customer data stored on the FlexPod solution, and a moderate likelihood and high impact for potential data loss due to hardware failure. Which of the following risk treatment strategies is the most appropriate professional approach? Option A. Focus solely on cost-saving measures for the FlexPod implementation, as the potential risks are theoretical and unlikely to materialize. Option B. Implement enhanced access control mechanisms, conduct regular security awareness training for administrators, and establish a robust data backup and disaster recovery plan with scheduled testing. Option C. Document the high-severity risks but take no immediate action, assuming that the inherent security features of the FlexPod solution will prevent any issues. Option D. Defer mitigation for the unauthorized access risk until the next budget cycle and accept the risk of data loss due to hardware failure, relying on existing, less frequent backups. Correct answer is B. Implement enhanced access control mechanisms, conduct regular security awareness training for administrators, and establish a robust data backup and disaster recovery plan with scheduled testing. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because the implementation of a FlexPod solution, while offering significant benefits, inherently introduces new risks. The risk matrix, a standard tool for risk assessment, categorizes these risks based on likelihood and impact. The challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate risk treatment strategy that aligns with regulatory requirements and best practices for data security and business continuity, without unduly hindering operational efficiency or incurring excessive costs. The FPIMPADM exam syllabus emphasizes a structured approach to implementing and administering FlexPod, which includes robust risk management. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified high-severity risks with a proactive and documented strategy. Implementing specific controls, such as enhanced access management and regular vulnerability assessments, is a direct response to the potential impact and likelihood of security breaches or system failures. This aligns with the general principles of IT governance and data protection, which are often underpinned by regulatory frameworks requiring organizations to implement appropriate technical and organizational measures to safeguard data and ensure service availability. Documenting this strategy provides an auditable trail, demonstrating due diligence and compliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without adequately mitigating high-severity risks represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Organizations have a duty of care to protect sensitive data and ensure the continuous operation of critical systems. Ignoring or downplaying risks that have a high potential impact, even if their likelihood is perceived as low, can lead to severe consequences, including data breaches, financial losses, reputational damage, and regulatory penalties. This approach demonstrates a lack of professional judgment and a disregard for the principles of risk management and due diligence. Another incorrect approach that involves deferring mitigation for high-severity risks until a future, unspecified date is also professionally unacceptable. This passive stance is a failure to act on known threats. Regulatory frameworks often mandate timely risk mitigation. Delaying action on significant risks exposes the organization to potential harm and can be interpreted as negligence. It also undermines the purpose of a risk assessment, which is to inform proactive decision-making. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a thorough review of the risk matrix, understanding the potential impact of each identified risk on the business and its stakeholders, and considering the likelihood of occurrence. This should be followed by an evaluation of various risk treatment options: mitigate, transfer, accept, avoid, against established organizational policies, regulatory requirements, and industry best practices. The chosen strategy must be documented, communicated, and regularly reviewed to ensure its continued effectiveness. Professionals must prioritize actions that address high-severity risks first, ensuring that the chosen mitigation strategies are proportionate to the risk and aligned with the organization's overall risk appetite and compliance obligations. Question 18. Examination of the data shows that a new FlexPod solution is scheduled for deployment within a tight deadline, with significant business pressure to go live immediately. The project team has proposed proceeding with the implementation and conducting a comprehensive risk assessment post-deployment to address any identified issues. What is the most appropriate approach to risk assessment in this scenario? Adhering to best practices for implementing and administering FlexPod solutions. Option A. Prioritize immediate deployment and defer the risk assessment until after the solution has been in production for a defined period, allowing for real-world usage data to inform the assessment. Option B. Focus the risk assessment solely on technical vulnerabilities of the hardware and software components, excluding operational and human factor risks. Option C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that identifies potential threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts to the FlexPod solution, and its data before the implementation is finalized and the solution is made operational. Option D. Proceed with the immediate implementation and rely on the vendor's default security configurations, assuming they are sufficient for the organization's needs. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that identifies potential threats, vulnerabilities, and impacts to the FlexPod solution, and its data before the implementation is finalized and the solution is made operational. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of new FlexPod solutions and the imperative to conduct thorough risk assessments. The pressure to deliver services quickly can lead to shortcuts in the risk assessment process, potentially exposing the organization to significant vulnerabilities. Careful judgment is required to balance operational demands with security and compliance obligations. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental principles of IT governance and risk management, which are implicitly or explicitly mandated by regulatory frameworks governing data protection and system integrity. Proactive and systematic risk assessment ensures that potential threats and vulnerabilities are identified and mitigated before a FlexPod solution is implemented and goes live. This approach minimizes the likelihood of security breaches, data loss, and service disruptions, thereby safeguarding sensitive information and maintaining operational continuity. It also demonstrates due diligence and adherence to compliance requirements, preventing potential regulatory penalties and reputational damage. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately performs a risk assessment before implementation is professionally unacceptable. This failure constitutes a direct violation of best practices in cybersecurity and IT governance. From a regulatory standpoint, depending on the jurisdiction and the type of data handled, this could lead to non-compliance with data protection laws, e.g., GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, or equivalent regulations in other jurisdictions. Ethically, it represents a dereliction of duty to protect organizational assets and client data. Another incorrect approach, such as relying solely on vendor-provided security configurations without independent validation, is also professionally unsound. While vendors offer security features, they are not a substitute for an organization's own risk assessment tailored to its specific environment and threat landscape. This approach can lead to overlooking unique vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that are specific to the implementation context. A third incorrect approach, focusing only on technical vulnerabilities and neglecting operational or human factor risks, is incomplete. A comprehensive risk assessment must consider all facets of potential risk, including the possibility of insider threats, accidental data exposure due to user error, or disruptions caused by inadequate operational procedures. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This typically includes identifying assets and their criticality, identifying threats and vulnerabilities, analyzing the likelihood and impact of potential risks, evaluating and prioritizing risks, and implementing appropriate controls and mitigation strategies. This process should be integrated into the project lifecycle from the outset, ensuring that risk assessment is not an afterthought, but a foundational element of FlexPod solution implementation and administration. Question 19. Implementation of a FlexPod solution requires migrating a critical dataset from a legacy system. The project timeline is aggressive, and the lead engineer suggests bypassing some of the documented data validation checks to meet the deadline, stating that the data looks good and has been verified by the source team. What is the most professionally responsible approach to ensure compliance and system integrity? Option A. Proceed with the migration, documenting the engineer's assurance and the decision to bypass validation, and plan for a post-migration validation sweep. Option B. Implement a partial validation process, focusing only on the most critical data fields, and document the partial completion. Option C. Accept the engineer's assurance and proceed with the migration without any further validation, assuming the source team's verification is sufficient. Option D. Halt the migration and insist on completing all documented data validation checks as per the FlexPod implementation guidelines, escalating to project management if necessary. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the migration, documenting the engineer's assurance and the decision to bypass validation, and plan for a post-migration validation sweep. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to data integrity and compliance within a FlexPod solution implementation. The core difficulty lies in balancing the immediate need for operational functionality with the long-term implications of data handling and potential regulatory scrutiny. The decision-maker must navigate the tension between expediency and adherence to established protocols, recognizing that shortcuts can lead to significant compliance risks and operational inefficiencies later. The pressure to deliver a functional system quickly can obscure the importance of thorough validation and documentation, making careful judgment essential. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a structured, documented, and validated process for data migration and system configuration. This aligns with best professional practices for IT implementations, particularly in regulated environments. By adhering to the established FlexPod implementation guidelines and ensuring all data validation checks are completed and documented, the administrator demonstrates due diligence. This approach minimizes the risk of data corruption, ensures system integrity, and provides an auditable trail, which is critical for compliance with any relevant regulatory frameworks governing data handling and system operations. This proactive stance prevents potential data loss or inaccuracies that could have severe operational and compliance consequences. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves prioritizing speed over thoroughness by skipping documented validation steps. This directly violates the principles of good IT practice and can lead to undetected data errors or configuration inconsistencies. From a regulatory perspective, this failure to follow documented procedures and validate data integrity can be seen as negligence, potentially leading to non-compliance with data protection or operational standards. Another incorrect approach might be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or the word of a colleague regarding data accuracy without independent verification. This introduces a significant risk of human error and bypasses the established quality control mechanisms, again risking data integrity and compliance. A third incorrect approach could be to implement a workaround without proper documentation or approval, which undermines the integrity of the solution and creates an unmanageable technical debt, potentially leading to future security vulnerabilities or operational failures that would be difficult to trace back to their origin, thus failing to meet audit requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, risk assessment, and thorough validation. When faced with time constraints, the framework should involve escalating concerns to management or stakeholders to seek extensions or resource allocation rather than compromising on critical implementation steps. The process should involve 1. Understanding the requirements and constraints. 2. Identifying potential risks associated with each approach. 3. Evaluating each approach against established best practices and regulatory guidelines. 4. Selecting the approach that best balances operational needs with compliance and long-term system stability. 5. Documenting the decision-making process and any deviations from standard procedures. Question 20. Benchmark analysis indicates a critical performance degradation in a core FlexPod storage component, impacting multiple business-critical applications. The system logs suggest a potential misconfiguration in a sensitive network access control list, ACL, that is preventing proper communication. The administrator has the technical expertise to immediately rectify the ACL, but doing so would bypass the standard change management process and involve direct access to configuration files that are typically restricted to senior security personnel. The urgency of the situation is high, with potential for significant financial loss if the issue is not resolved within the hour. What is the most appropriate course of action for the administrator? Option A. Escalate the issue to the security team and await their authorization and guidance before taking any action, even if it means extended downtime. Option B. Attempt to resolve the issue by rebooting the affected storage controller, as this is a common troubleshooting step that does not require special authorization. Option C. Document the observed issue and the suspected cause, then immediately contact the designated security lead or incident response team to request emergency authorization to modify the ACL. Option D. Immediately access and modify the ACL to restore performance, documenting the changes retrospectively and informing the security team after the fix. The correct answer is D. Immediately access and modify the ACL to restore performance, documenting the changes retrospectively and informing the security team after the fix. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between the immediate need to resolve a critical system issue and the potential for unauthorized access to sensitive data. The administrator is faced with a situation where a quick fix might bypass established security protocols, leading to a breach of data confidentiality and integrity. Careful judgment is required to balance operational urgency with the imperative to uphold security and compliance. The correct approach represents best professional practice, because it prioritizes adherence to established security policies and regulatory frameworks. By documenting the incident, seeking appropriate authorization, and involving the security team, the administrator ensures that any deviation from standard operating procedures is transparent, auditable, and approved by the relevant authorities. This aligns with the principles of data protection and system security mandated by regulatory bodies, preventing unauthorized access and maintaining the integrity of the FlexPod solution. An incorrect approach that involves immediately accessing and modifying sensitive configuration files without proper authorization is professionally unacceptable. This action constitutes a direct violation of data access controls and security policies, potentially leading to a data breach and non-compliance with regulations governing data privacy and system security. Such an action undermines the trust placed in the administrator and exposes the organization to significant legal and reputational risks. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the issue and hope it resolves itself, is also professionally unsound. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and responsibility, potentially allowing a minor issue to escalate into a major system failure or security vulnerability. It fails to meet the professional obligation to proactively manage and maintain the integrity of the implemented solution. A third incorrect approach, which is to delegate the task to a junior administrator without adequate oversight or authorization, is equally problematic. This action abdicates responsibility and could lead to further security missteps or policy violations if the junior administrator is not fully aware of the implications or lacks the necessary permissions. It fails to uphold the principle of accountability in system administration. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of organizational policies, security protocols, and relevant regulatory requirements. When faced with an urgent issue, administrators should first assess the severity and potential impact. If immediate action is required and standard procedures are insufficient, they must document the situation, consult with their supervisor or the designated security team, and obtain explicit authorization before proceeding with any non-standard remediation steps. Transparency, accountability, and adherence to established governance are paramount.